Want to welcome everybody to the VR Financing and Distribution panel. We have a really wonderful group of people here. We have Prybill from AMD Studios, Becca Friedman from HTC Vive, Max Weiss from Kaleidoscope, and Tony Mugavero from Littlstar. All right, so we're going to start off by having some presentations, and you could get a little bit more information about the companies and what they have to do with VR financing and distribution. Robin is up first.
Okay, so I'm Prybill from AMD Studios, and I am going to be, my slide presentation is focusing on the VR Lbes, which is short for location-based experiences. And that is, I'm talking about the network as it stands today, and in my viewpoint in research, how many, where we are, and where we're going. So here I'm listing the various types of distribution deals that can be made. An all rights deal, just as the name implies, you sell all the rights. A licensing deal, and that's where you allow a distributor to they take a portion and then they license and pay you a fee. And then limited distribution deal, as the name implies, a revenue share co-marketing agreement. Now this is where you go in with a company and the company agrees to co-market your product in exchange for splitting a revenue share. And then an overall deal, this is mostly like a traditional studio would do where you're a production entity, they love what you're doing and they say, hey, let's make an overall deal with you, so then we have you either exclusively or the first right of refusal at your product that you are indeed marketing. Then the next and last one is market research collaborative spend. It's also known as a beta, I think is how you pronounce it, which is earnings before tax, interest, depreciation, amortization. My advice is to stay away from that deal. So next, I'm looking at the geographic distribution of LBEs. And what you will see, oops, I forgot to click here, is we have, if you look at the numbers, I did not purposely include China because there's so many in China, it's just hard to keep track. But as you look around this, and you'll see for North America, when I did this graph, I actually completed it in June. And since then, now I know that we have at least 99 in just the US alone. And that's from June. And per capita, and I was explaining to my dear friend Nancy, who's in the audience, that Canada is actually leapfrogged ahead of the United States in terms of LBEs per capita. And on the next slide, I'm focusing on location-based experiences. And forgive me, I can't include everyone, but I certainly wanted to include those names that you should be aware of that are distributing these VREs, if you will, which is also virtual reality experiences. And then lastly, I just did a quick slide of two VR experiences that we did and funded at AMD Studios. So I'm going to pass the baton to Becca.
Thank you, Robin. I'm Becca Friedman. I'm with HTC Vive, specifically with Viveport. To give you a little background on, there it goes. A little bit of background on Vive as a company. We're effectively 4 different branches. You can think of the product and hardware team, the ViveX accelerator team. Think of ecosystem building, tools, research, some content. We have the Vive Studios team, which is first, second, third party development, funding, distribution. Development, funding, and publishing, and then you have us on the Viveport team, we're the marketplace and distribution side. Viveport, specifically for distribution, has a number of different initiatives and offerings. Part of the thing that we're looking at right now with virtual reality is how do you find the different consumer markets? How do you find where people are going to be experiencing VR? And initially, you have PC for the home, you have the mobile headsets, But then also, as Robin mentioned, one of the great potential areas and that we're seeing is an incredibly growing market are location-based experiences. So we have Viveport for the home. We have Viveport Mobile, which is Viveport M. It's primarily in China right now. We have Viveport Arcade, lovingly known as Viveport Arcade. It's actually any locations that you can think of, malls, movie theaters, museums. It expands. It's a software solution. And then we have, of course, different distribution models within our PC store. So one of the things that we focus on specifically at Viveport is ways to help discoverability. One of the big issues that we face in VR is how do you get your content out there to consumers? How are you seen? How do they find you? When there are, it's still early days for content. There's a lot of games out there, and for non-gaming titles, it can be a little bit difficult on in traditional platforms to actually find that kind of consumer base and those eyes. So how do you do that? One of the things that we have at Viveport is a big focus on marketing. How do you take developers and bring them to the next sort of level? There are a number of different ways that we do that, reaching out directly to consumers, as well as social pushes, paid media spends, all of that. One of the big initiatives that we're trying out right now is subscription. People are a little bit nervous in many cases to actually move into VR. VR is known for many reasons as a gamer's platform because many of the early adopters had the PCs that could run the HMDs. Well, how do you find those new audiences? How do you appeal to people who may be a little bit more nervous to buy full retail sale price titles, give them a way to experience more, and then lead them into the full retail price? So one of the things we have is Viveport subscription. It's $6.99 at the US consumer price. You get to try 5 titles a month. Change them up for the next month, and then we have a revenue split, kind of like a bounty on the back end for developers. We also, this is just a quick preview of the Viveport Arcade sort of landing page. It's software, so operators can locate different types of content. You see a lot of games up there. It's a lot of games have been made. It's primary source of content on the market for VR, but one of the things that operators can do is they can source this content, they pay for points or site license, and then developers get paid for the actual usage. And that's just a quick little overview, but I'm sure we have plenty more that we can discuss looking at enterprise and educational markets as well for distribution. So Max?
Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Max, and I am a producer at a company called Kaleidoscope. What is Kaleidoscope? We are a startup that focuses on finding and funding the best in immersive media, specifically focusing on projects by independent studios and independent creators. So I think if you ask most people in the VR AR world what our greatest challenge is today, in my experience, they usually give you one of 2 answers. It's usually hardware adoption rates, which is basically how can we get more headsets onto more people's faces. And the other answer that I usually get is lack of good content. So it's like a chicken and the egg problem that's not actually unfamiliar to a lot of new media innovations. We're just dealing with it in VR right now. And what we're seeing at Kaleidoscope is that it's just that a lot of the content out there doesn't meet the criteria that we think we need to solve that content problem. So we fall pretty strongly on the side that the way we break out of this chicken and egg cycle is actually the content side of the equation. And what I mean by that is the way we get more people who aren't just enthusiasts, who aren't just gamers, who don't just have a PC set up already in their house, to buy more headsets and to buy more VR content, to watch it, is to have a really deep and broad library of compelling, immersive, native, and repeatable, often, VR experiences. The problem is that, like I said, most of the projects out there these days don't check off maybe even most of those boxes. There are a few, of course, that are getting close. And what we see is that a lot of the creators out there who are helping us build towards this place where we have enough content are independent artists and studios that have actually the creativity, the will, the ability, and maybe most importantly, the vision to push the medium where it needs to go. The problem is that maybe they lack the most important thing of all of that, which is the funding to actually accomplish that vision. And that is where we like to think that we come in. Sorry about that. At Kaleidoscope, our mission is to give independent VR creators and studios the resources they need to do that great work towards building that deep and broad library of content that I'm talking about, that we think will get us to the place where VR is an actually significant entertainment industry. So resources, of course, can mean a lot of different things, but what we focus on is funding and distribution. What we've done is we've leveraged our experience over the last 2 years in the VR, AR industry with both sides of the industry, creators on one hand and investors and distributors on the other, and we've created a network that brings both sides to the table and hopefully bringing value to both sides. So for creators, bringing value means helping them find funding for their projects while also maintaining that artistic integrity and the vision that led us to work with them in the first place. And on the investor and distributor side, that means helping them find the projects that best match their criteria so that they're actually getting tangible value out of an investment or financing of a project. It's really important to us that we bring value to both sides of the table because without one another, VR content is not going to get where we all need it to go in order for adoption rates to increase. So I think an interesting way to look at this and to finish my presentation is to talk a little bit about an example case study. And I want to do a case study of an in-development project that we've been working on. This project recently funded, presentation's a bit screwed up, so I'm just going to go off, explain it a little bit more to you. This project, which I can't actually give the name for, but it recently raised over $1.5 million in financing, which is pretty good for an independent VR project. So where does $1.5 million for a project come from? And by the way, this is a project that I think is personally maybe the best on our platform. So I'm really excited to have it get so much traction, so much money. So your first source is going to be a distributor. And what's a distributor? It is someone like Becca from Viveport or someone from Oculus Store. Basically, those are the two big ones, but it's online distribution platforms. So what they're doing is they're funding a project usually in exchange for some sort of online exclusivity period. In our experience for indie projects, it's usually 3 to 12 months. Next, you've got a brand. That's a really important part right now in the early stage of a financing project is getting a brand on board. So for this project, Project A, we were able to get $100,000 for this brand, which is pretty good. And brands is like any media sponsorship. What you're doing is you're getting funding for a project in exchange for an association, logos inside the project, presence at premieres, exhibitions, things along those lines. Third is what Robin talked about, which is LBEs, location-based experiences, which is, as Robin said, something that we're seeing a huge growth in, especially over the last year in the States. As she said, China's just going crazy with it for the past few years. And we expect, Kaleidoscope expects over the next 2 years so that to be a really important part of the VR project financing process, given how much we expect that area to grow. So what an LBE will do is they'll provide, what an LBE company will do, in this case they provided $225,000 of the funding, of the $1.5 million, is they'll provide funding in exchange for a different type of exclusivity right that actually differs from the online version of it. And that's really great for us because that allows us to help split up a project's rights into different areas, which will let us finance the project even more effectively. And lastly, what I think personally is the most important aspect of the financing process are independent investors. And right now, the way investing works in a VR project is similar to a lot of investments. What they'll do is they'll provide funding for a project in exchange for a percentage of revenue. So in this case, they funded $800,000 of the $1.5 million. So that's over half of the project. And usually you're going to get, an investor will get up to 50% of revenue share. And the way it works is they'll get paid out up until the time they get paid out. So they're going to get the first $800,000 of revenue, and then they start sharing the revenue. So I want to end by really highlighting how important I think independent investors are to the future, of getting to that future I was talking about, of having this deep library of content. Right now, most of the investors we work with are, in a way, they're like very rich enthusiasts. They have some sort of investment, personal investment in seeing VR succeed as a medium. They are either have stake in other companies or they are really passionate about the technology. And that's great for us on a day-to-day because it makes our lives at Kaleidoscope really easy. It's really much better to work with someone who actually knows a lot about VR and is passionate about it. But the problem is it's not scalable, really at all. There just aren't enough enthusiast investors out there. So what do we do? In order for us to get to that point where we have this really big library of content, which will attract, hopefully, your average consumer to buy the headset, to buy the content, and bring us to where we want VR to be as an entertainment platform, we need to increase the cash flow coming in investment by, I mean, I would say 10 times, but it's probably more than that, and 20 times maybe even. So how do we do that? We make VR content actually an attractive investment in terms of how much money you get back on your monetary value. And I think all of us here in the room and on the stage don't have a good answer for how we do that necessarily right now. But at Kaleidoscope, that's the thing we're focusing on over the next few months especially, is how do we create innovative, creative investment vehicles where we actually provide a return on investment for investors who maybe don't know anything about VR and they're just looking to actually do their job and make their money. So how do we do that so that projects like Project A here can get 4 times as much money as they got today, and so that we can attract more people to VR so we can actually bring it how and make it what we all think it should be. Thanks very much.
Great, thanks, Scott. Yep, there we go. Okay, Tony Mugavero from Littlstar, hi. He's actually going to talk through what his company does in terms of distribution as I go through the panel discussion. Okay, by the way, I'm Irena Cronin from Spout Reality, so I'm your moderator. Okay, so I actually asked everybody to have a presentation regarding what their company does because honestly, both distribution and finance right now for VR is extremely fragmented. And there are only a few methods and ways that this is being done. So everything out there is actually pretty unique. So these are unique perspectives on actually how to do distribution and finance currently. I expect in the future this will be a different story, but right now, both fortunately and unfortunately, this is the way it is. Now is actually start with distribution because that's a tougher nut, and then we can get into finance. Want to ask directly a question from Becca. Since we heard about HTC Vive and how distribution is going on there, and also finance in a certain way, wanted to ask Becca about the landscape for VR distribution, about some competitors, and what do you think is going on there?
Hi. So, as you mentioned, distribution is a tough nut to crack. We at HTC and at Viveport specifically are trying to find all the different ways that we can reach different populations. You have your traditional models out there with the individual retail stores. You have Steam, you have Oculus Store, you have PSVR, you have Viveport. And we're all, approaching a very tried and true kind of method for standard entertainment distribution. But there are also other models out there that exist for different types of media, subscription models like Netflix and various other channels, LBEs. What we're all trying to do, I think right now, just across the board, is find what does stick and where the populations are actually looking to consume. I think all of us on here are very well aware that a lot of people aren't trying the titles that are available right now in home, and so location-based is a good way both for people to go out and have a social VR experience where you can actually, in some cases, watch your friends try a title out in a location space, in a VR cafe or otherwise. and it makes it more of a communal sort of community thing. And that's one thing that's really big actually overseas in Eastern, in China specifically, is VR is more of an out-of-home experience, whereas a lot of things that we're finding in the US is that it's an in-home sort of personal experience. Part of the charm of VR is that you can be in isolation, but how do you bring that isolation sort of into a more social space? So finding different platforms for distribution. Different stores are offering things, multiplayer, more social community features within content, and different ways to monetize within the content as well. So in-app purchases so that you can actually interact with other people, increase sort of the different opportunities within those pieces that you're trying out. So say you want to unlock features, different ways to find money within the individual platform. So talking in circles right now, but specifically trying to find different SDK features that can increase standard home sales that exist, and then trying to look at those other venues that don't yet exist or are very new. So, for example, the subscription offering, that's something that we don't yet know if that is going to be the next best big thing for VR, but it's something that we're happy to try and see if we can find that market there. Anybody that says that they know exactly how to distribute, I wouldn't believe them, because right now the market is still too young and the technology is still growing and the population is still growing. So chicken and egg, find the content, grow the market, connect people with content, but get the content out there. And so that's one of the big reasons why, I mentioned earlier that how do you market and how do you sort of find the audiences, despite having different distribution methods, how do you find the market to attract to that distribution method is another thing, because people aren't necessarily looking for VR. They're finding it in various ways, such as attached to the feature film that they're interested in going to see. There's a link to a website to, a cardboard download, similar features like that. But one of the other things that we're trying to do right now, and part of the reason that I'm here with VIFF is that we're looking at what audiences are out there that exist that are entertainment hungry, that love to watch films and to experience music and to watch sports or participate in sports. And how do you show them that VR as a technology is a way for them to experience those same things just in a different way? So we're working, actually just starting up a film festival initiative. Vancouver's our brand new first effort with this. We're trying to reach out to the festival audiences and filmmakers and try to say VR is a place where you can go and you can create, and how to connect everybody with the tools for creating, and then also with distribution. So working with festivals like VIFF to try to help the creators that they're working with to get distribution on the back end as well. So trying to help promote them in a different way.
Great, thanks, Becca. That's a way of getting the traditional audience in as well, which is really important. Okay, so a question for Tony. Obviously, well, maybe not so obviously for some people, but people that go online to try to find VR don't really know what's good and bad. So it's kind of a hit or miss thing. They try one thing, they try another thing. It's kind of good right now that a lot of these experiences are free, because otherwise people would just spend all this money, and it would be bad for the industry if you spent money and the experience was actually bad.
Right.
So could you tell me a little bit about how Littlstar is trying to solve the curation effort?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing that we found early on is that, Littlstar is consumer facing, and so what we found is that if people had a bad experience on Littlstar, then they thought it was Littlstar's fault, when it could have been any number of things getting up to the final point of that content being completed and given and delivered to us for us to deliver to everybody else. So we started to, highly curate the experiences that were coming through Littlstar, particularly in a VR headset, and, look for things like movement and stitch lines and, incorrect horizons and, things like that. So I'm very sensitive to movement in a VR headset myself, so I'm kind of like the bar at our office that it's if there are people in our office that can be underwater swimming with sharks and it's moving all around and they're not affected by it at all, but we try to be mindful about as wide of an audience as we can possibly get. So there's a few different companies that have been working, on their own kind of version of rating system, which, rated R or rated PG doesn't really translate into VR. There's so many other dimensions of how you engage with the content. So, we are similarly working with a number of different people in the industry to come up with more of a standard around rating systems so that, up front that if, it's not only mature content, but it's also has quite a bit of movement in it and, could make you sick or has a specific fear factor. There's a bunch that goes into it beyond just saying that, this is PG-13. So we're trying to think about it on a bunch of different dimensions.
Great, thanks. Okay, so I have a question for Max. You had mentioned other competitors, or I don't think competitor is the right word, but other companies that are doing financing, which is really, really important for VR right now because they're pretty much the only ones that are financing it. So you said Oculus and a couple other ones. Do you have any notion of the figures involved in terms of the financing? What they've been doing? Your competitors, in fact.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, we don't really consider them competitors.
Yeah.
For us, it's more, since we're more of, in a way, we think of ourselves as like a marketplace where those two groups, creators and people like Oculus and HTC, can meet. So actually, it's great for us if Oculus wants to invest a lot of money, and it doesn't really affect us because as of right now, at least, we're not investing money ourselves into the projects. That being said, I would say in terms of the size of figures, the example I gave earlier is on the higher end of what a project is going to see. Often you might just see a much smaller amount of investment in a project, especially if it's in early stage of development. Even as small as $50,000, $100,000, just to get it off the ground. We recently had a project that we're executive producing go the route of Kickstarter to fund because of those problems exactly. Because they needed funding to, create a demo so that they could actually gather larger investment from a group like Oculus, which doesn't want to invest $40,000 in something that hasn't been made yet. They'd rather invest $400,000 in something that has something solid behind it.
So how many experiences right now does Kaleidoscope have under its wing?
Well,
actively?
Yeah, so we executive produce 10 projects around at a time. So these are projects that we keep a very close tab on. We're coaching them through the actual production process. We're helping design the actual experience and create it, to guide them towards an experience that will be marketable, something that will have a return on the investment, and something that will be attractive to financiers and distributors. That being said, we also have another, usually at a time, anywhere from like 60 to 80 more projects on our platform, which creators join for free for Kaleidoscope. And so we're providing support for them. We're providing a place where industry leaders know they can go and find really good independent content, and that's where they go to look. And at the same time, we're doing some of the coaching that we do for the executive produced projects, but it's not as intensive.
How are they finding the content?
Sorry, repeat the question.
How are people finding the content for Kaleidoscope?
Well, it's not, for example, like an aggregation network like Viveport, for example. It's something much more targeted towards, like I said, industry leaders. So that basically it's a subscription model right now, where industry leaders, hopefully, people like the people on the stage with me right now, or their companies pay a fee and they have access to our library and basically access to white glove service where we help set up all the connections that need to be made for a deal like the one I was talking about before to get done.
Okay, that's great to know for distribution. I have a question for Robin. Okay, I do know that AMD and now AMD Studios has financed quite a bit of VR experiences. Could you tell us about a couple of them?
Well, one of the first experiences that we financed was Pearl Harbor, and we did that with Time Life. And that was on the 75th anniversary of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And that was actually released through, of course, Steam and through the Oculus, but they it's now housed permanently at the Pearl Harbor Museum in Hawaii. And another experience that we have also worked on is Bahabali, the VR Experience. Bahabali is a movie that was just released, I believe, in April, and it is an Asian Indian film that is the highest grossing film of all time for Indian films. And we did an accompanying piece for the virtual reality to put out in Tribeca when the movie was released so that we could co-market the film.
So if you're allowed to tell us, how many projects does Amdu Studios currently have under the hopper for VR?
At present, we're in negotiations, honestly,
Okay.
with several. Because right now, our emphasis for AMD Studios, we're a technology company, in case you all didn't put two and two together, which is fine. But we are one of the first to come out and be in support of VR from, I don't know how many years ago. And we try to be VR agnostic, meaning our goal is to make certain that our hardware is implemented from beginning to the end. And so that's why we choose to be agnostic, if you will. But just like most either developers or hardware manufacturers or headset manufacturers, et cetera, sometimes you don't have the piece that you want to showcase your hardware. So what's the best way to do that? Well, the best way to do that is to find a creator and then co-create a piece together that will showcase the technology that you're indeed selling.
Great, thank you. Okay, I want to open up the floor now because we talked about the unique capabilities of each of the companies here. What do you think are the major problems with VR distribution? So I'll let anyone answer that.
It's in terms of the actual distribution of the assets, it's pretty fractured at the moment. And so, I mean, that's what we were founded on, and, why we have been trying to solve that problem is really just because, like, each one of the headsets wants to have its own app store, and that's to us somewhat of a problem. We think of VR headsets as like a computer monitor, and they should just be dumb, and you can kind of put anything in there that you want to put in there. And so that's created a fracturing of the ecosystem, which is actually terrible for consumers and terrible for content owners. You might have a couple quick wins early on where, one of the headsets will come in and fund a project, but that's actually hurts discoverability, and it hurts the content owner from getting that content as far and wide as they possibly can. So it's pretty short-sighted thinking in terms of, actually growing the ecosystem. And so it's created this struggle of how do I best find the best content no matter what device I have. And so for, a content owner, you have to be mindful of those kinds of things where it's, am I going to develop this for the PlayStation, or am I going to develop it for the Rift or the Vive? Am I going to try and get it across all of those headsets? Great. Well, that means now you have to go do a different commercial relationship with every single one of them. You have to go through a different approval process with every single one of them. You have different, largely shitty analytic solutions for all of them. It's a real struggle for a content owner to get their content far and wide across all of these devices. And I think it's too early in the space for there to be blood in the water on a lot of these things. And so, that's the whole reason we founded Littlstar. I mean, I didn't get a chance to talk too much about it at the beginning, but we're a hardware agnostic distributor of content. And so, and it was largely, we got the Oculus Kickstarter and started building from that day one, and knew right away that it was going to be a challenge for content owners to package this stuff up and distribute it far and wide as easily as possible. And then same thing from the consumer perspective. So I think that's something that there's going to be competitive lines that get drawn no matter what we do, and Oculus and HTC and PlayStation are all going to knock down, drag out, fight it, but at the end of the day, I think the community, if we want this to be successful, the community has to put their voices forth to those companies and say, like, we need to make this as easy as possible to distribute this content across devices. You would never have a video game that would only work on a certain computer monitor. That's the most ridiculous. Like, would you ever have a video that would only work in one place? Like, that won't happen. So the sooner I think that we focus on breaking down those walls, it'll be good for consumers and good for content owners, and everybody can start making more money, and consumers can start finding better content. So maybe a little controversial, but let's go.
No, it's not.
Yeah, I think what Tony's getting at is that I think maybe the biggest problem is just basic economics, which is that VR, as Tony's implying, really should be VR content really should be an economy of scale. It's a network economy. It's something that will increase benefit for everybody if there's a central provider. The problem is that it's in zero companies' interests. Like, for example, it's not in Becca's company's interest to just cede that space to Oculus, and it's not in Oculus's interest to cede that space to HTC. So in a way, I actually think it's a good thing. I mean, I think it's a little bit, reminds me of IBM versus Apple in like the 80s and 90s. It's going to be a big fight and a big war, but we'll either end up with one central distributor or we'll end up with two really strong ones. But I think it's an annoying answer, but we just need to give it some time.
Yeah, and I think you're expecting a response from me, which I'm happy to provide, mostly because I think what Tony's saying is absolutely correct, and we don't, at least from Viveport, we don't come from a stance of trying to be the only distribution platform out there. We're just trying to be a complementary source and try to find ways to help distribute in ways that aren't necessarily being attempted at other platforms. We might not succeed in that, and we might actually succeed in that, but to provide a place for developers to find that other audience. And one of the things that we do have access to is our headquarters of HTC are based out of Taipei. We have distribution access in China and across Asia and various other places in the world where we do operate. So it's just trying to help provide additional sources of distribution. And also coming from that point, we agree that mandating that content only be relegated to one HMD is problematic. So all of our funding deals, we don't actually require exclusivity. So all of the first-party distribution that we have through Vive Studios, they're developing first for HTC because that's us, but also for Oculus. You'll find Arcade Saga has been published both on Oculus Rift, on Viveport, and for Vive. And they're looking at all the different ways that they can actually get content out there and trying that themselves to see how do we find that audience. We're too new to be trying to command any specific share of the market. We really need to help find ways that people get their content out there. We're very much developer first. We want to make sure developers can find access to audiences, make money, because if they're not making money, if they're not making more content, there's nothing for the audience. So it's really just trying to find additional outlets, not so much specifically to take hold of a specific market share.
Yes, it's true. I know that HTC Vive has been making greater inroads, definitely, than other, like Oculus, let's say. That's for sure.
I mean, what they're doing is
Yeah.
absolutely fantastic.
Right.
They're able to fund things that, in ways that we
Yes.
may not necessarily. So absolutely, if you're putting forth the amount of money that they're putting forth to produce content, they actually, there's no reason not to request exclusivity. It's just a different model.
Yeah, two sides of the coin. Yep.
And personally, I feel that once you start seeing, especially you're going to see the uptick in 2018 for the growth of these LBEs. Once that starts, that rocket ship just is going to be taking off. And you will also see a market correction with regard to how distribution deals are done, because traditionally we want to follow the format of feature films and television and their distribution models. Obviously, with Netflix, Amazon coming on and changing that model and pricing and structure, we, in this side of the fence, have to also change our ways as well. But I promise you that in this section of the world for North America especially, you will see a growth of LBEs. It's already taken off. If you look at Europe, France is leading. You're going to see a cinema in Amsterdam, VR cinema. They're expanding rapidly. And then, of course, there's Japan. I mean, outside of China, Japan and the Asian region is unbelievable, the growth that is there. So I'm actually encouraged and excited.
That's wonderful. I'm also extremely bullish on location-based models. Totally. I can't wait to have them everywhere. Okay, so let's move on to financing right now. And this is even a little more tougher to talk about because it's a little ephemeral. We do know the several companies, the headset makers that have made financing like Oculus. And HTC also in its own way has made financing through the LBEs. What do you think is going to happen? Let's talk about cinematic VR, because that's the easiest one to tackle. Do you think that the studios are going to go full on with financing or stick with this market? Yes, go ahead.
I know the answer to that. And so, and Tony can speak to that.
Great.
In greater detail. But yes, once you have a strong IP and you have IMAX doing the distribution, they're teaming up to pay for the rights outright to go ahead and make the VRE and put it in their theaters with AMC. So it's there. But Tony can elaborate even more.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a video perspective, you know, cinematic VR, which is pre-rendered, and you're in a VR headset, but you're watching a video effectively. That's already started to happen. So, you know, I think, you know, recognizing that people don't want to always work for their content is, you know, just like why a studio creates a movie and a game company creates a game today. You know, people want to be entertained differently, and sometimes they want to roll around on the floor and dodge bullets, and sometimes they want to sit with their hands in their lap and play a game, or sometimes they just want to sit and, you know, have popcorn on the couch and watch Netflix. So it's the spectrum of entertainment absolutely includes video content coming from big studios that's going to be built into cinematic VR experiences. And that same content can be windowed as well. I mean, we have in our office right now, we have a positron chair that's a lot like the chairs that you are sitting in right now, and the chairs just move, and they can tilt you all the way back and forward, and but you're just watching a video in the headset, and so it's a cinematic VR experience it is 4D. You know, you really feel like you're on that roller coaster or you're in that race car or whatever it is. So then you know the DNA of those companies won't change, and at least it won't change overnight. So game studios are great at making games, and movie studios are great at making movies, and television studios are great at making television. ABC television is not going to start making games. I'm sorry, like they're just not. And if they do, it's going to be like little things that are companion pieces to TV shows. And you know, there's the dynamics of what we see in, you know, the point was already made of having a natural tendency to the traditional studio model and the traditional TV model and the traditional gaming model. Just because this is a new medium it doesn't mean that we're going to reinvent the models necessarily. You know, you might have consumer behavior starting to centralize around subscriptions, but there's nothing new about that. You know, Netflix just did it at the right place at the right time. So, yeah.
Well, you never know. It might be Amazon that comes up with their VR channel, or NBC Universal might.
Yeah.
Okay, so wonderful. We are out of time, but I wanted to thank everyone here for such a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.